الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على أفضل خلق رب العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Talking today about intergenerational conflict, and I'm also talking about honouring our parents, الوالدين. So to get us started, we just look a couple of one-word or two-word answers to the intergenerational gap, what it actually is. So if we can just get, draw a mind map, just intergenerational conflict in the middle, and then just draw arrows to all the answers. So who'd like to break the proverbial ice?
Okay, I'll break it.
Excellent.
Old people.
Okay, interesting. Anyone else?
Sorry, can you explain what the word means?
Okay, so I just want to get people's general perceptions on what it actually is to begin with, and then I'll get into definitions. So, what comes to your mind when you hear that concept, intergenerational gap?
Can we use different color?
Change?
Can we use a different color?
Just call out, right?
Yeah, just call out. Feel free to call out.
Generations, different generations, young generation, old generation.
Good, really good. That's cool.
Tradition.
Yep, cool. One of the sisters, maybe?
Conflict,
Conflict? Okay. Yeah.
lack of understanding.
Yeah, great. That's kind of fast-forwarding things a bit, but cool. We're heading in the right direction. All right.
I think we're going a lot faster than our scribes are able to.
Oh, okay.
They've only
All
got
right.
two of these so
Changing
far.
pens.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do it all the same time.
Are there more? Okay, what was that, sorry?
Peer pressure?
Peer pressure? Yeah, okay.
Parental pressure.
Parental pressure, interesting.
Technology.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so the definition that I have here is the intergenerational gap is the idea that age creates a barrier or barriers relating to levels of social interaction and compatibility at a social level and at an emotional level. That's actually not too bad. So how do people feel about that statement?
I don't know. To me, a barrier is something that's at a certain place, but surely there's a continuum of difference where we're more or less different to people, and one of the factors in that is difference in age, but then there are a whole lot of others simultaneously having their effects.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting take. Anyone else? Okay, so going back to what Sister Adat said earlier, she mentioned the word conflict. So do we believe that having a gap, if we can see that there is a gap, does that necessarily translate into conflict?
It's possible for people who are very different to each other to be happy with each other.
That's true.
We can complement each other's differences.
That's true.
Conflict comes from difference. It's not really a conflict of hate, it's just a conflict of difference. Different cultures, different traditions, maybe, and lack of understanding, I guess.
Yeah.
I think conflict comes from a combination of arrogance and ignorance, and in a way you can't really separate the two.
This is really good. Are we getting this stuff? All right. From the back, I'm not really getting much from the back. Sisters? Okay, so would anyone like to share perhaps one of their intergenerational experiences? Maybe that would help kind of speed this discussion up.
This isn't a personal one.
Mhm.
I know of a relationship, a married couple that had a very big age difference between them, and eventually that led to divorce.
Okay.
Because of the lack of understanding. So that's why.
Yeah. I guess, that's interesting as well. And we often see that when the age gap is big in terms of an husband and wife, sometimes it's hard to maintain compatibility and that kind of thing. So That's not out of the ordinary. Let's stick with the parent-child relationship though. Would anyone like to share perhaps some of their intergenerational experiences? Or it doesn't have to be yours, or maybe you heard it from someone else or something like that. People don't answer, I'm going to start picking people out. Hashim?
Come on.
First day back, bro. No?
Nothing comes to mind.
Sorry? Yeah.
Mustafa,
Okay.
go for it.
Yeah, great.
Go for it, Mustafa.
I've got one
Yeah, cool.
where the parents, like the older generation, to them a university degree is everything, whereas in our day and age, in this society, a degree doesn't really mean as much as who you know, possibly, or where you can go with your skills.
That's right. That's right. That just reminds me of a story actually. A friend of mine, after he finished school and he didn't do well, and then later on he didn't get into TAFE, and he was basically a dog bludger for a little bit. His dad sat him down and said, you know, you failed here, there's no hope for you. As if the only hope was ever to go through the school system. And in this country we know that that's not the case. There's, you know, there's plenty of different avenues for people to pursue their careers. Academia is not necessarily for everyone.
Yeah, you'd be a bricklayer.
Oh, well, there you go.
On that note though, the percentage of people who do have a university degree is much higher in our generation than it was in our parents' generation.
Yeah, okay.
Despite that they got theirs for free.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, most sociologists, anthropologists and psychologists agree that the gap does exist. Sociologist Trevor Hogan, who I've actually met personally, used to teach at La Trobe, he believes that the best manifestation of this gap, or it's best communicated through the parent-child relationship. That's the best kind of case study. And he goes on to say that the conflict is usually a byproduct of the child's failure to acknowledge or accept the authority of the parent. How do people feel about that statement?
So it's the kid's fault.
It's a bit one way.
It is, isn't it?
Isn't there a narration that goes something like don't teach your children as your parents taught you because they live in a different time.
Yeah, don't raise your children as you were raised.
Yeah.
They've been created for a time.
Yes, that's right. Ahsan. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. By the way,
So the blame is on the parents.
well,
Maybe
according
it's
to...
neither. Maybe it's neither.
That's a point from Imam Ali.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's, you know, Trevor Hogan says one thing, Imam Ali says another, so obviously it's a no-brainer, we're going to go with Imam Ali. Okay, so by the way, that quote by Trevor Hogan was from a book called Australia, the Arse End of the Earth.
I remember when that came out, that was hilarious.
Who said that? Was it Paul Keating?
It was Paul Keating.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I thought that just might that avenue. So I remember when I was young, when I do something silly, my dad would always tell me that I don't know what's best for me, or that I didn't know how to make a sound decision because I wasn't quite an adult yet. This was probably when I was about 16 or 17. Now that's very demeaning, isn't it? That can be very patronizing for someone who's, you know, who's kind of, you know, they're taking their world in their stride and they're kind of just learning about the world and they think they're all that, you know, 16, 17-year-old. But sometimes, yeah, our parents can be protective and it might come across as authoritative, but at the end of the day, they do want the best for us and they only do that kind of thing out of love. And I think growing up, adolescents are generally rebellious against authority. In retrospect, now that I'm almost 28 years old and I have children of my own, I can see exactly where they were coming from. You know, every time that they told me personally that, you know, to watch out about, be careful of a particular friend that I had at the time, or not to stay up too late, or not to watch a particular film, or you know, that kind of thing. Now it all makes sense to me. Or not to go to the school formal. That was an interesting debate back in the day. Yeah, so I mean, I mean, hindsight is great. But like at the time, it's really hard for people to be objective and to see that bigger picture, especially when you're growing up and you're that young. And like parents of Middle Eastern heritage have that kind of tendency to be authoritative, and sometimes it could be hard to take. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room would can relate to that.
Sister Zahra had a point. Yes.
Sorry?
Yeah, I have something
Excellent.
quite similar when I was little.
Mhm.
And my mom would be like, you don't know what you're doing. And I'll be like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I was having this kind of conflict with my mom.
Yeah.
Now, when I go over to my mom, I
Mhm.
feel like very happy when she
Mm.
sees me, like I don't know anything, and she
That's
treats
right.
me like a baby. I feel like
That's
really,
right.
really happy.
Yeah. So
When I'm growing up, no.
okay. How about now?
Yeah, now, as I said, like,
Yeah.
I appreciate when she
Mm.
treats me like her little daughter who doesn't know anything.
Yeah. Like myself, my father is almost 17 years. Actually, it's almost 37 years older than me. So, growing up, it was very hard to be, to maintain some sort of, relationship. It was hard to see any kind of compatibility. But after I got married and had children of my own, there was a kind of connection there. The connection started to grow. And sometimes that does come with maturity, because, we began to see that there was commonality there. And sometimes the best way to get along with someone is to try to look at things from their perspective. The research shows that the intergenerational conflict is a problem in all communities. However, for families of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, the problem is amplified. What do people think about that?
I was just going to make a point, and I was going to
Yeah.
say, in regards to our parents being disappointed with us, it could be because of the fact that they went through so much to, come to this country
Mhm.
and put up with the different language and missing
Yeah,
their family
yeah,
and
yeah.
all that, and then to see their children not come up the way they would like it to, will be
Mm.
very difficult for them to accept.
Yeah, that's right. That's very true. So they have such high expectations of us, and making that kind of that move when you're migrating, basically halfway across the world, for the sake of your children, and they don't live up to your expectations as high as they might be, that can create conflict. So definitely, that's a good point, Brother Ash. Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I was reading recently that these days there's this really common tendency when people have like their own psychological problems, and like a lot of this is rooted in like Western theories about how psychology develops and how humans develop. A lot of it is up to the parents, so certain parental patterns of interacting with the child and traumas and using the wrong kind of parenting can lead to really dramatic personality defects and that sort of thing. But there's not actually a whole lot of evidence for that. Like, it's not as major a factor as it's made out to be in theory. There's a lot of like some of the big sort of forefathers of Western psychology, like their whole thing is based on parental sort of but it's not really true.
Some recent studies have contradicted that, finding that with school-age children at least, the influences in their life, a much larger proportion is their peers, followed by their teachers, and then the parents only make up about 8% of the influence.
Yeah, like environment is like way more important than parents.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Development.
Yeah. Well, they say what ends up molding, it's a nature versus nurture debate, but according to some sociologists, they say what ends up molding a child's personality is mostly made up from the school, the street, the significant other, rather than what happens inside the house. But again, that's a theory, and it's open to,
But don't you think that let's say other things may be influential, but because there's a deep emotional attachment to what is at home, that impact could be larger? Like maybe in terms of the percentages, maybe only as in how much time is spent in regards to these other factors, rather than what is spent at home. Because a child must spend more time at home, at school awake, than he spends at home awake, because he sleeps most of the time. So, but the deeper emotional factors could be more detrimental. For example, if a child was at school with his friends, everything is fine, and he goes home and he has an abusive father, surely the impact of that will be far greater than the impact of, say, his school environment.
Yeah, that's an interesting take.
It's going to be huge under those circumstances,
Yeah.
but then the proportion who have an abusive father.
So we'll go back to this statement. So, as I was saying, intergenerational gap, or the intergenerational conflict, if you want to call it that, it's a problem in most communities. But for people who migrate, or families who migrate, that problem, it's much clearer. And the thing is, we'll look at a semi kind of or case study, or mini case study, because I think the best kind of evidence can be drawn from experience. And I was born in this country, but I was around when the influx of migration from the Iraqi community first started here in the early to mid 90s, and you can clearly see the problems. It was very, very clear. We'll get into that in a sec. Let's do some brainstorming on this concept of integration. Can we put that up on the board? So, who knows what integration is?
No, a new idea. A new idea.
Like trying to fit in.
Okay.
Like a new box, and then ideas from
It's like things coming together and sort of becoming one, or coming stuck to each other somehow.
maybe put a circle at the top.
Yep.
I think there's a difference between integration and assimilation.
Yeah, definitely.
Where integration is more positive, it's more fitting in on your own terms, whereas assimilation is like molding to, the circle or the apparent community or culture or traditions that you're settling into.
That's right. Yeah. So assimilation is basically disconnecting from your heritage and from your native culture and adopting the new culture. And integration is finding the balance. That's the best way that I like to explain it. Finding the right balance between the culture or the norms or the rituals or whatever you want to call it, that you inherited from your parents or that you lived with when you were young, if you migrated here young. Finding the balance between that and the society that you've called your home.
There's
What about
another term.
values?
Oh, God.
How do you find the balance of values if they're different?
Yeah, I mean, values, it's a completely different argument, because our values for the most part are derived from, well, it depends on if we're practicing or not, but we're assuming that we're talking here about what's going on in this room. So our values are derived from our religion, from Islam, and from Ahlul Bayt, Salam Alayhim, and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So, having said that, I think that when we're talking about integration, we're really only talking about, like the baseline, which we could we'll call it tolerance. I don't really like the word tolerance, but I mean tolerance should be the minimum kind of requirement, shouldn't it? That actually, I'm talking a bit about that later, but it should be the minimum requirement. Like migrating into a new country, getting accustomed to their norms and their local culture. To be able to tolerate that culture should be a minimum requirement, but that's not always the case. So we've already spoken about integration. We've already got that stuff up. Yeah. Okay.
Do you think we could just add another term, acculturation?
I was going to get into that. Excellent.
Oh,
well done.
Yeah.
Really good.
Love it.
Okay.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
They're about 5 minutes. So
Really?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Pauline Hanson infamously said that integration is the absolute minimum requirement for people to migrate to this country, and eventually the local culture should become their native culture. So she believes in this idea of assimilation, and she supports it. And she's very selective, saying that we should choose who comes to this country. But that's a different discussion for another day. I know I've only got 5 minutes, but I'll be as quick as I can. We'll use the Iraqi Shia community as a case study. So as I said, they started to migrate here in the early to mid-90s. Most of them who arrived at that time spent years in refugee camps in Saudi Arabia, some of them up to 7 years in refugee camps in harsh conditions in the middle of the desert. Many of them were very conservative, and many never even integrated. Some of them have been here for more than 20 years and they still haven't integrated. Many of them avoided educational institutions and the workforce for fear of integrating. Why do you guys think that they found it so difficult to integrate?
Fear of the unknown.
Excellent. Yeah.
I think a lot of them had hopes that they would go back because the situation in Iraq was kind of different, and only after the change of regime that they got the shock that they couldn't go back and they haven't prepared themselves for staying here, and they don't have a suitable home back there. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's very true. So there are 3 concepts that we need to become familiar with, and I think that will shed more light on the Iraqi immigration situation. The first one is culture shock. If we can put that up.
Can I ask a question, sorry?
Yes.
This theory or this idea, does that come out of your research or you ask parents actually?
No, there's sorry. My father has actually written a book on intergenerational conflict, and there's a lot of theory and there's a lot of discussion and a lot of publications on this topic in the disciplines of sociology, in anthropology, and psychology. So this theory, it's been debated in many academic circles, but I mean, I think most of us in this room can agree that our experiences alone can kind of tell us that there is that kind of that kind of conflict in terms of the differences between the generations and trying to establish a certain level of commonality and common ground and that kind of thing. So I mean, it's really open to debate, but I personally do believe in this kind of theory.
No, what I'm asking is like, I'm from the same generation, which is came in the 90s. This generation is assessing the other generation. You are not actually giving the other generation the like a freedom or the opportunity to assess themselves, or giving them so. It's like from one side only.
Okay, fair enough. So you're saying that we're making too many assumptions about people who migrated?
Yeah.
Okay. Inshallah, we'll get...
You spoke about Waldin, but most of the talk is actually...
Yeah. I'm focusing a lot on the theory and the sociological aspect at the moment.
But this...
if I have more time, inshallah, next week, because I only got like 3 minutes left, I can go into it more detail.
I'll just make a comment that this is not unique to our Iraqi community. Even the Greeks and the Italians have the same... It's every new generation that comes to Australia, especially the first generation.
I was only using the Iraqi example because I lived it, that's all.
I didn't say...
Yeah, in general, I think it's a fact now.
Sorry guys, I know it's really interesting, and I mean, I can see that some people might not agree with the things that I'm saying, but I just want to get through everything that I can, and inshallah, if I have more time next week or in coming weeks, we can continue the discussion. So culture shock. Culture freeze is the next one. And culture freeze. And acculturation, as David so intelligently pointed out earlier.
Wow.
Okay, so culture shock. Upon migration, people may find it difficult to adapt to social norms, rituals, and responsibilities. So they go into a state of shock. I'm not talking about the Iraqi community anymore. This leads to isolation and a complete rejection of society in some extreme examples of culture shock. Australia is it's a very liberal kind of place, and it's secular as well. So what may be seen as taboo in the Middle East, here may be encouraged. often people may avoid social interaction altogether, just for the purpose of trying to hold on to their own values and to their own culture. Some people may think this is funny. I actually know a guy who told me that he specifically avoids going to the city and even walking down the street because he doesn't want to feel like he's in a foreign country. So this is a living, breathing example of culture shock. Acculturation. So over time, this process of adapting may become easier, and people begin to develop a level of tolerance for the culture and the society that they've called their own. This process is called acculturation. Culture freeze. Other times, people who can't adapt go into a very conservative, frozen culture kind of state, where they block out the culture that they're being exposed to, and they cling to their native culture. At times, for fear of losing their own culture, the cultural practices that they inherited from their parents or that they lived with when they were young, they're emphasized here even more strongly than they were back home. And this is common in the Greek community, as Mohammed pointed out earlier, because as we know, the Greek community here in Melbourne is the largest, second largest in the world, only second to Athens, which is in Greece. Sallu ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. So now we know about these concepts. How does this relate to the intergenerational conflict? I'll just get a couple of comments and then we'll do a quick role play, if that's all right. Is that all right? And then we'll go into Salah. Yeah. So how do people think that all of this relates to intergenerational conflict? So those three concepts that we've spoken about and that case study.
If the parents are going through one of these, either a gradual process of acculturation or a culture freeze or in culture shock, but their children are not because they were born here, how can they comprehend each other's experience? Very difficult.
Exactly.
Very difficult.
That's right. That's right. One more comment and then we'll get into the role play.
Now, those people who are refugees who come to Australia, try to adapt here. They go back to their country once it's a bit safe. And then they find themselves as a bit outsiders in Australia and in their country.
Yeah, yeah.
So they feel a bit lost.
That's right. That's good.
They don't know what to do.
Yeah. So while many parents find it difficult to adapt, parents who migrate to this country, their children seemingly fit in straight away and they integrate and they go through the school system. And that creates another barrier, the language barrier. And we'll get into that in a sec. So could I just get, actually, just to be quick, David and Lada, can you come to the front? You're going to be the volunteers.
Great.
Sallu ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Okay, so I'll say child or parent, and then child or parent. Lada, do you want to be child?
Yeah.
Okay, and David can be parent. And like there are only 2 comments each, but in the end, if you guys want to improvise, just so you can show me that you're actually feeling the character, that'll be really good as well. Okay, child.
Why don't you understand it? Why can't you be like everybody else, like the cool parents? Look at your beard.
I will never go back to those people. And hey, why don't you speak our language anymore?
Child.
We're in Australia now, and we should try to fit in. Besides, your culture is old and boring. You didn't even know who Carlton is.
Carlton? We shouldn't forget who we are. We must not lose our identity.
You can't even find your ID.
Do you want to dignify that with a response?
I don't need my ID. My identity's in here.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay. Thanks for that, guys. Thanks for that. We don't have much time, so we'll just finish up. So these kinds of conversations happen in homes all around the country. You know, the Indian family, there's some research on that at the moment. The Indian, we can all see the recent growth in the Indian population in Melbourne. Asians as well. Asians are by nature very conservative, East, especially Asians from Southeast Asia. So there's a clear disconnect. I mean, we can see, I mean, I know that that was fictional and I wrote that myself, but I mean, what David was saying, you know, in terms of, you know, why are you trying to move away from our culture? You know, this is what we've taught you. Why are you trying to be someone else? That's not uncommon. That happens very often. And then the child is telling the parent, hold on, we're here now. Why can't we be like these people? And then, you know, the parent is saying, hold on, you know, I'll never be like those people. A complete rejection, assimilation, as I was saying earlier. And perhaps some mistargeted anger as well, on the part of the parent and on the part of the child. Okay, so it usually results in a widening of the gap. You know, the language and the child integrating and that kind of thing. So it's really hard to find commonality or common ground. Now that we know what the problem is, I want everybody to go home and to think about this question, and maybe take some notes, and maybe next week or the week after we can talk about this more. What can we do about this? What can we do about this problem? وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.